Hello, church family. Welcome to today's Sunday school lesson. We are in session 10 entitled Trust. And our key idea this week is God provided victory and brought himself glory through Gideon's army. And we're in Judges chapter 7, verses 1 through 8, then skipping a little bit, and then 19 through 23. We're actually going to read the whole chapter there in Judges 7 together. So I will read over here on my other monitor the section that is being skipped in. So, our key idea is God provided victory and brought himself glory through Gideon's army, but we're going to start off by asking the question, why do stories of people rising from humble circumstances to achieve success resonate so strongly with us? We love an underdog story. We love the Cinderella story, this coming from nothing to gain everything idea, kind of like, again, underdogs, but this is true in real life. Abraham Lincoln came from a humble background to become the president of the United States. There are many occasions in the Bible where God uses someone who is not up to the task physically. Moses is one of these people, and David is an example of this as well. But in the book of Judges, we see that God uses unlikely people to fulfill and complete his plan. And so today we're going to be looking at Gideon again. Last week we looked at the calling of Gideon, and now we're going to see Gideon succeed over his enemies. So Gideon is referred to in verse 1 as Jerubbaal, or Jerubbaal, which means let the Baal contend, or let Baal fight against us, because he tore down his family's altar to Baal in his hometown of Ophrah. So we're going to see how God weeded out his military, his 32,000 men that he started with, down to just 300, and how even though those dire circumstances were before them, these 300 men defeated all of the Midianites. And so that's what we're going to be looking at. Now, there's some things in our context that don't really have any bearing on our lesson today, but they do have bearing in general. And that is, Gideon was great for this purpose. He did wondrous things for the Lord, and he fulfilled and completed his purpose for the Lord. I'm sorry, the white balance is doing weird things. I'm going to try to fix that here. Okay, that should be good. But after his victory over Midian, Israel had peace for 40 years, but Gideon created an altar in his hometown, an ephod of gold, which is an apron, like what a priest would wear. And our text actually says, or not our text today, but chapter 8 actually says that Israel played the harlot. Israel prostituted themselves to this idol that Gideon made. Now, Gideon made this idol as a remembrance of what God had done, but it was good intentions but bad practice, because it was against the Ten Commandments that thou shalt not make any graven image before you for yourselves. And so people began to worship this golden ephod that Gideon had made. So let's begin reading there in chapter 7, verse 1. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over me and say, I save myself. Now announce to the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave for Mount Gilead. Or leave Mount Gilead, sorry. So 22,000 troops. We were at 32,000, now we're at 22,000. Of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remained. Sorry, we were at 32, and now we're at 10,000. Then the Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many troops. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go. So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink. The number of those who lapped with their hands to their mouths was 300 men. So they're scooping the water up and drinking the water. And all the rest of the troops knelt to drink the water. They were kneeling down and putting their faces into the river to drink. The Lord said, I will deliver you with 300 men who lapped and hand the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home. So out of these 10,000 troops, 9,700 of them are sent home, and only 300 are left. So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 troops who took the provisions and their ram's horns. The camp of Midian was below them in the valley. And then let's actually read here, starting in verse 9. That night the Lord said to him, get up and attack the camp, for I have handed it over to you. But if you are afraid to attack the camp, go down with Purah your servant. Listen to what they say, so then you will be encouraged to attack the camp. So he went down with Purah to his servant to the outpost of the troops who were in the camps. Now the Midianites, Amalekites, and all the people of the east had settled down in the valley like a swarm of locusts, and their camels were as innumerable as the sand on the seashore. When Gideon arrived, there was a man telling his friend about a dream. He said, listen, I had a dream. A loaf of barley bread came tumbling into the Midianite camp, struck a tent, and it fell. The loaf turned the tent upside down so that it collapsed. His friend answered, this is nothing less than the sword of Gideon, son of Joash, the Israelite. God has handed the entire Midian camp over to him. So then, verse 15, when Gideon heard the account of the dream and its interpretation, he bowed in worship. He returned to Israel's camp and said, get up, for the Lord has handed the Midianite camp over to you. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, probably of 100 each, and gave each of the ram's horns in one hand and each of the men a ram's horn in one hand and an empty pitcher with a torch inside it in the other. Watch me, he said to them, and do what I do. When I come to the outpost of the camp, do as I do. When I and everyone else with me blow our ram's horns, you are also to blow your ram's horns all around the camp. Then you will say, for the Lord and for Gideon. Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch after the sentries had been stationed. They blew their ram's horns and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. The 3 companies blew their ram's horns and shattered their pitchers. They held their torches in their left hands and their ram's horns to blow in their right hands. And they shouted, a sword for the Lord and for Gideon. Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army began to run, and they cried out as they fled. When Gideon's men blew their 300 ram's horns, the Lord caused the men in the whole army to turn on each other with their swords. They fled to Acacia House in the direction of Zerorah. There we go, Zerorah. As far as the border of Abel Meholah near Tabith. Then the men of Israel were called from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. So we have 3 sections today. We have too many, still too many, and just right. So let's look at our first section. This is verses 1 through 3. Jerubbaal, that is Gideon, and all the troops who were with him got up early and camped beside the spring of Harod. Now, Herod here is not Herod as it is in the New Testament. This is more Harod, relates to trembling. The Midian army camped about 4 miles north near the hill of Moreh, and so this is just a spring down from the hill where they were heading. The camp of Midian was north of them, below the hill of Moreh in the valley. The Lord said to Gideon, you have too many troops for me to hand the Midianites over to them, or else Israel might elevate themselves over to me and say, I saved myself. God says, this is going to be too easy, and it's going to be easy enough that people might think that Israel was able to do this on their own. So what I'm going to do is send some of your troops home so that you face very uneven odds, so that the only way you can win is with me being with you. So he says to tell the troops, whoever is fearful and trembling may turn back and leave Mount Gilead. So 22,000 of the troops turned back, but 10,000 remained. So So God said there in verse 3 that fear was a reason soldiers could stay home during a war. That's something that was announced in and given in Deuteronomy chapter 20. It would affect the overall morale and displayed a lack of faith in God for one to be afraid. And so if you were afraid of going into this fight, Gideon sent you home. He didn't want you there because it was going to be you were going to be detrimental to the task. And so we have all of this good, like, great human preparation, good army force, a good advantageous position up on a hill going down into the valley. But in what ways might we try to do God's work by our own might and for our own glory? Well, we might think that we got ahead on our own and we're going to accomplish God's purpose through the financial plan, our own good financial planning. And then in order to show that God is the one who is the provider of all things, especially money, he might send a car accident or car repair or something your way that requires you to spend your savings in order to cause you to rely on him for your provision instead of your own hard work, your own work ethic. And so that's a very superficial way, but there are times where we think that we can work hard enough and we can do enough on our own, and we get in the way. There's the popular phrase is the path to hell is paved with good intentions. We have great intentions, but we get in our own way because we don't trust the Lord to provide the way. So that brings us to our second section where God says, well, you have 10,000 and that's still too many people. Let's read there verses 4-8. The Lord said to Gideon, there are still too many troops. Despite losing 22,000 troops, God said the remaining 10,000 still needed to be reduced. God's test would whittle that number down to 300. Take them down to the water, and I will test them for you. If I say to you, this one can go with you, he can go. But if I say about anyone, this one cannot go with you, he cannot go. So he brought the troops down to the water, and the Lord said to Gideon, separate everyone who laps water with his tongue like a dog. Do the same with everyone who kneels to drink. The number of those who lapped with their hands, picked the water up with their hands to their mouths, was 300, and all the rest of the troops knelt to drink the water. The Lord said to Gideon, I will deliver you with the 300 men who lapped in the hand of the Midianites over to you, but everyone else is to go home. So Gideon sent all the Israelites to their tents, but kept the 300 troops who took the provisions and their ram's horns. The camp of Midian was below them in the valley. So God used a social engineering test that he was sovereign over to determine the number of troops that Gideon would have to fight the Midianites. Now, we would look at this and go, okay, what's the big deal? Was there some significance in the way these men drank? No, there was just the difference between them, that those who were picking up the water were just a smaller number than those who knelt down to drink. Most of the men knelt down to the drink. That doesn't make the others weird or abnormal at all. They were just in the major minority of this company. And so this is probably a weird instruction. Gideon got this and went, what does it matter how they drink out of the river? But when have we had to trust God despite not understanding what he was doing or asking of us? What was a time in your life where God asked you to do something and you had no idea why he was asking you to do that particular thing? Because it just did not make human sense to do it. And then finally, our third section, just right, this is going to verse 19 through 23. Gideon and the 100 men who were with him went to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, which was about 10 p.m. to 2 a.m. Only a few sentries would have been awake at this time guarding the camp. They blew their ram's horns and broke their pitchers that were in their hands. They made a loud racket. So then the other two companies, all three companies in total, blew their ram's horns and shattered their pitchers. They held their torches in their left hands and their ram's horns to blow in their right hands. And they shouted, "A sword for the Lord and for Gideon." Each Israelite took his position around the camp, and the entire Midianite army began to run. And they cried out as they fled. They ran away screaming. When Gideon's men blew their 300 ram's horns, and the Lord caused the Midianite men, to in the whole army to turn on each other. God used the enemy to destroy itself in this chaos while the Israelites watched. Then they fled to Acacia House in the direction of Zererah, as far as the border of Abel Maholah near Tabbath. Then the men of Israel were called from Naphtali, Asher, and Manasseh, and they pursued the Midianites. So how should knowing God acts in unpredictable ways impact how we live? When something weird or unexpected happens, we can be fairly confident that God is not surprised, and God even might be the orchestrator of what's going on. He might be the one who's actually saying, this is the way I want things to happen. But that God will always use any circumstance that he allows to bring about good. Any circumstance that God allows, God will always redeem. And so we need to be faithful to listen to the Lord, no matter what it is he's telling us, even if it is only taking 300 men against an entire army of the Midianites. We need to trust the Lord instead of our own logic and understanding. Thank you for being with me today. I look forward to worshiping with you very soon. Bye-bye.